Joining us now to discuss the latest on the incident is former Secret Service agent and Homeland Security analyst Charles Marino. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Sure, Wyatt. Good to be back with you.
So I suppose, this in many ways speaks to kind of a broader issue about the level of polarization in the political sphere that an incident of this nature could actually take place. Obviously, it was during the election campaign in Ecuador at a campaign event, but people are noting that this particular candidate was very strong on anti-corruption policies that were against drug cartels, issues that to the majority of people would probably seem fairly appealing. So I guess, how did we get to this point?
Well, look, every platform, no matter the country that a presidential candidate is running in, can tend to aggravate opposing parties. In this case, as you described, this presidential candidate was running on a platform of anti-corruption and anti-cartel. So I think it's pretty apparent the groups that he could run afoul of in terms of the platform that he was running on. And of course, all of this needs to be taken into consideration by the candidates and the candidates' team in terms of how they protect themselves going forward.
And moving forward, you used to be a part of the Secret Service. Obviously, this particular incident was in Ecuador, but there has been incidents on the campaign trail before in the United States and in other countries as well that perhaps signalize that it's time to look at enhancing protection in some way. I know you were on the program before talking about Secret Service protection for presidential candidates. Obviously, right now, the majority of presidential candidates have their own private security. But moving forward, do you think it is time to perhaps, as a result of this event, have perhaps a more in-depth conversation about the level of security that is required, needed for political campaigns?
Yeah, I think every country needs to take a look at that, especially as we're talking about the situation that took place in Ecuador. Here in the United States, we have a very well formulated, structured process that involves continuous threat assessments on presidential candidates as they enter the political foray and as the presidential candidate process continues and gets closer towards the election. You and I both spoke about that previously, and it's an important part of the process. And it all starts with intelligence. As we're talking about the specific situation in Ecuador, we know the platform that the candidate was running on. We know the groups that he was opposed to, and you have to pay attention to the intelligence. And we also knew here that the candidate had received previous threats against his life based on the very platform that he was running on. So you've got to pay attention to the intelligence as it comes in. You need to pay attention to any specific threats as they come in. And here, the government, with an overall 8 presidential candidates that entered their hats into the ring, you need to pay attention to the threats against each of them and how they're going to be protected moving forward.
How much of these attacks, whether it be the incident we're talking about here in Ecuador or whether it be verbal attacks, online attacks, how much of them are directed, from your perspective, at the candidate, at the individual, versus them as a person, or perhaps just someone's overall feelings towards politics? And adding to that, how big of a role does perhaps misinformation or disinformation play into some of these attacks being levied against various politicians from around the world?
Well, all of these threats, Wyatt, begin with some type of a grievance. As you know, we currently witnessed threats against the President of the United States, originating out of the state of Utah. And the foundation of those threats originate with some type of a grievance, either against the government or the specific candidate or government official. Here in Ecuador, it was likely a grievance specifically directed at the candidate based on the platform that they were running on, right? And anytime that you run on a platform of anti-corruption, specifically targeted against cartels and other organized groups, you're talking about interrupting overall business. Back to Utah with the president, these threats are easy to track down and assess here in the United States. And that's exactly what law enforcement does here in the United States is they identify who's making the threats, what the foundation is, what the actual credibility of the threat is. For example, can the person formulate a plan of attack? Do they have access to weapons? Do they have the means, meaning do they have the means to travel? Do they have the means to finances? And then based on that, you make your assessment. In the case in Utah, the president was traveling to Utah. So that stepped up the urgency for the Secret Service and the FBI to act in executing an arrest and search warrant. I think countries around the globe need to undertake that same type of threat assessment process as they talk about protecting future presidential candidates. Because, like I said, you can't please all the people all the time. And these presidential candidates are going to run on platforms that no less can aggravate or tend to threaten to disrupt other groups that are threatened by these candidates.